The morning bell rang across the Galactic Union Academy, and the long metal corridors filled with the sound of hundreds of feet. Some of those feet were clawed, some were soft and padded, a few didn't touch the ground at all. The Academy floated in orbit above a blue gas giant, and it held the children of every species in the Union. They came here to learn, to train, and to become the next generation of leaders, soldiers, and scientists. Humans were new here. They had joined the Galactic Union only 12 years ago, and most alien species still didn't know what to make of them. They were small, they were soft, they had no claws, no armored skin, no venom, no natural weapons of any kind. Most aliens looked at humans the way a wolf might look at a rabbit, with mild curiosity and absolutely no respect. The medical wing sat at the far end of the eastern corridor, past the training halls and the dining complex. It was a small, quiet place. The beds were clean. The air smelled faintly of something sweet, like flowers from a planet most students had never visited. And behind the front desk, arranging bottles and bandages with careful hands, stood the human school nurse. Her name was Hana. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple knot. She wore a white uniform with long sleeves that reached all the way down to her wrists, even though the station was warm. She had a calm face and a gentle voice, and she always carried candy in her pocket. When students came in with cuts or bruises or fevers, she treated them with a patience that seemed endless. She never raised her voice. She never rushed. She moved through her work like water flowing over stone, smooth and quiet and steady. Most students barely noticed her. She was just the nurse. The human nurse. Doran noticed her for the first time on a Tuesday. Doran was a Veskari, a tall, broad-shouldered reptilian with dark green scales and sharp yellow eyes. He stood nearly 2 meters tall, even though he was only 16 years old by standard galactic time. His father was Grand General Rokan, the most famous military commander in the Veskari Empire, and Doran never let anyone forget it. He walked through the academy like he owned it. He spoke loudly. He laughed at things that weren't funny. He was not cruel exactly, but he was proud, in the way that young people are proud when they have done nothing yet to earn it. That Tuesday, Doran was in sparring class. He was paired against a smaller student, a thin Morok boy with gray skin and wide, nervous eyes. The match lasted about 4 seconds. Doran hit him too hard, and the Morok boy went down with a cracked rib plate and tears streaming down his face. The instructor sent the Morok boy to the medical wing. Doran was told to go too, since his knuckle scales had split from the impact. He walked into the medical wing, with his hand held up like a trophy, green blood dripping between his fingers. Hana was already treating the Morok boy. She had her hands pressed gently against his side, feeling for the crack in his rib plate. Her fingers moved with a sureness that came from years of practice. She found the fracture, applied a bone-mending patch, and gave the boy a small piece of candy wrapped in blue paper. "You were very brave," she told him softly. "Rest here for an hour. You'll feel better." The Morok boy sniffled and nodded. Then Hana turned to Doran. She looked at his bleeding hand. She didn't flinch at the green blood or the sharp edges of his torn scales. She simply took his hand in both of hers, cleaned the wound, and began applying a sealing gel. Doran looked down at her. She was so small compared to him. Her hands were so soft. He could feel the warmth of her skin against his scales, and it almost made him uncomfortable. No Veskari healer had hands this gentle. "You hit him too hard," Hana said. She didn't say it like an accusation. She said it like a fact, like saying the sky was dark or the station was cold. Doran pulled his hand back the moment she finished. "He should have blocked it," he said. Hana looked at him with calm brown eyes. She didn't argue. She just reached into her pocket and held out a piece of candy. Doran stared at it. "I'm not a child," he said. No, Hana agreed, but candy is nice. It doesn't have an age limit. Doran didn't take it. He turned and walked out, his boots heavy on the metal floor. Behind him, he could hear Hana humming softly as she returned to her work. The sound followed him down the corridor like a ghost. He forgot about her almost immediately. Pila did not forget. Pila was a filly, an insectoid species with 4 arms, large dark eyes, and a pair of delicate antennae that could sense things most species could not. Filly could feel vibrations in the air, detect pheromones at incredible distances, and read biological information from other creatures just by being near them. It made them extraordinary scientists and doctors. It also made them very, very observant. Pila visited the medical wing that same afternoon for a routine health scan. She was quiet and polite, and Hana treated her with the same gentle care she gave everyone. She checked Pila's respiratory system, tested her joint flexibility, and updated her medical file. During the examination, Hana reached across the desk to grab a scanner, and her sleeve rode up just slightly, no more than 2 centimeters. It was only for a moment. But Pila's antennae caught something. The skin on Hana's wrist was not smooth. It was rough, textured, layered in a way that Pila's biology training immediately recognized as scar tissue. Not the thin, clean scars of surgery. These were deep, chaotic, overlapping, the kind of scars that came from repeated, violent trauma over a long period of time. Pila said nothing. She sat very still as Hana finished the exam, thanked her politely, and left. That night, alone in her dormitory room, Pila accessed the Academy's medical database and began researching human scar tissue patterns. She cross-referenced what she had sensed on Hana's wrist with known causes of similar scarring. The results came back, one by one. Burn trauma from plasma exposure, fragmentation wounds from explosive devices, tissue damage consistent with energy weapon discharge at close range, deep lacerations from edged weapons or clawed species. Pila sat back in her chair. Her mandibles clicked together in the filly expression of deep unease. These were not the scars of an accident. These were not the marks of a clumsy lab technician or an unlucky shuttle passenger. These were the scars of a soldier. And not just any soldier. These were the scars of someone who had been in combat so many times, so close to death so often, that their body had become a record of violence. Pila looked at her screen for a long time. Then she looked at the door, in the direction of the medical wing far down the corridor, where a soft woman with gentle hands was probably still humming to herself while she organized bandages. Who are you? Pila thought. Who are you, really? The question would keep her awake for a very long time. 3 days passed, and the academy moved on in its steady rhythm. Classes were held, meals were eaten, students trained and studied and complained about homework, the way students everywhere have always done, regardless of species or planet of origin. Pila did not move on. She sat in the back of every class, quiet as always, but her mind was somewhere else. It was in the medical wing, circling around the mystery of the school nurse with the impossible scars. She replayed the moment over and over, the sleeve slipping, the rough terrain of ruined skin, the calm expression on Hana's face as if she had forgotten the damage was even there. On Thursday morning, the mystery deepened. The class was Military History of the Galactic Union, taught by Professor Voss, a tall Veskari with silver-tipped scales and a deep, commanding voice. Today's lesson was one every Veskari student knew by heart. The Siege of Rathan. Rathan was a fortress world on the edge of Veskari space. 18 years ago, it had been surrounded by a hostile fleet. The Veskari garrison was cut off, outnumbered, and slowly dying. For 31 days, they held the line. On the 32nd day, Grand General Rokan led a counterattack that broke the siege and saved the garrison. It was the most celebrated battle in modern Veskari history. Doran sat in the front row, chest out, chin high. This was his father's story, his family's glory. Professor Voss spoke with great detail about the Veskari tactics, the bravery of the soldiers, and the brilliance of General Rokan's final assault. Then, near the end of the lecture, he said something brief, almost a footnote. It should be noted, Voss said, that during the final phase of the siege, a small intervention from a minor allied species assisted in the evacuation of wounded Veskari personnel from the northern sector. This contributed to the reduced casualty figures. That was all. A single sentence. He moved on immediately to discuss the victory celebrations. Doran didn't notice. Why would he? A minor species doing minor things during his father's greatest triumph. It wasn't worth thinking about. Pila noticed. She noticed the way Professor Voss said, minor allied species, without naming them. She noticed how quickly he moved past it, and she noticed the word evacuation, because in military terms, evacuating wounded from an active combat zone was not a minor thing. It was one of the most dangerous operations that existed. That evening, Pila went to the Academy's historical archive and searched for records of the siege of Rethen. The Veskari accounts were extensive and proud. They filled hundreds of pages with details of every Veskari unit, every commander, every act of heroism. The minor allied species received exactly one entry. It was listed under Auxiliary Support Operations. It read, Human Volunteer Medical Combat Element, 32 personnel, deployed to Northern Sector for casualty evacuation under active fire. Duration of operation, 9 hours. Veskari personnel evacuated, 114. Human casualties, 26 of 32. Pila read the numbers again. 26 out of 32. That was more than 80%. 32 humans had walked into a war zone to save strangers from a species that considered them weak and unimportant, and 26 of them never walked out. There were no names listed, no medals recorded. The entry was written as if it described a supply delivery, not a sacrifice. Pila saved the file and closed the archive. Her hands were shaking. The next day, everything changed because of a door. It was a routine emergency drill. The Academy ran them once a month. This one simulated a hull breach in the eastern corridor. Alarms sounded, lights flashed red. Students were directed to move quickly to sealed safe zones, while heavy blast doors closed along the corridor to contain the simulated breach. Pila was in the eastern corridor when it happened. So were a dozen other students, including 2 very young Morok first years, who were too small and too slow. The blast door began to close. It was a massive slab of reinforced metal designed to seal airtight in case of real decompression. It moved on hydraulic rails, slow but unstoppable. The 2 Morok children were directly in its path, frozen in panic, their small gray bodies pressed against the wall. Pila saw it happening. She was too far away to reach them. Hana was not. The nurse appeared from the medical wing entrance, like she had been waiting for this exact moment. She moved fast, faster than Pila had ever seen a human move. She reached the blast door, planted her feet, and put her hands against the edge of the closing slab. And she held it. The door weighed several hundred kilograms. It was powered by hydraulic pressure, meant to create an airtight seal. It was not designed to be stopped by a person. But Hana held it. Her boots scraped against the metal floor. The muscles in her arms and shoulders stood out like cables of steel under her white uniform. Her jaw was clenched. A vein pulsed on her temple. She did not scream or cry out. She simply held the door open with her body while the 2 Morok children scrambled through the gap to safety. Then she let go, and the door slammed shut with a boom that echoed through the corridor. Hana stood still for a moment, breathing hard. Her hair had come loose from its knot. A thin line of sweat ran down the side of her face, and her sleeve was torn. The fabric had caught on the rough edge of the blast door and ripped from wrist to elbow, exposing her entire left forearm. Every student in the corridor saw it. The arm was not the arm of a school nurse. It was a landscape of destruction. Long, jagged scars ran from her wrist to her elbow, some white with age, some still faintly pink. There were circular marks that looked like burns, small, precise, evenly spaced, as if someone had pressed something hot against her skin, deliberately. There were thin lines that could only be cuts from blades, and across the back of her forearm, 4 parallel grooves that looked exactly like claw marks from a large predator. The corridor was silent. Every alien eye was fixed on that arm. Hana looked down. She saw the torn sleeve. For one brief moment, so fast that only Pila caught it, something flickered across her face. Not shame, not fear. Something older and heavier than both. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual calm expression. She pulled the torn fabric over her arm, tucked it in place as best she could, and walked back toward the medical wing without a word. Doran had been standing 10 meters away. He had seen everything. The impossible strength, the torn sleeve, the scars. He knew scars. He had grown up in a military family. He had seen his father's body after battles, the marks of plasma fire, the ridges left by Veskari combat blades, the dents in his scales from projectile impacts. Grand General Rokan wore his scars with pride. They were proof of his courage. Hana's scars were different. There were more of them. They were deeper. They covered more of her body than a single forearm could explain, and she hid them. A Veskari warrior showed scars because they meant victory. Hana hid hers. What did that mean? What kind of war left you with scars you didn't want anyone to see? That night, Doran lay in his dormitory bed and stared at the ceiling. He kept seeing that arm. He kept seeing the way she held the blast door, a door that should have crushed her, with nothing but her own body. He told himself it was nothing, a strange human, an accident in her past, nothing more. But his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Down in the medical wing, the lights were dim. Yunho, Hana's young assistant, sat on a stool and watched as Hana carefully rebandaged her exposed arm. He was a quiet young man with steady hands and serious eyes. He had his own scars, hidden under his own long sleeves, but his were fewer. He had served only 2 years in the field before coming here. Hana had served 20. They saw, Yunho said quietly. I know, Hana replied. They're going to start asking questions. Hana finished the bandage and rolled her new sleeve down over it. She looked at Yunho and gave him a small, tired smile. Let them ask, she said. It doesn't change anything. I'm still just the nurse. Yunho looked at her for a long time. He wanted to say something, that she was the bravest person he had ever known, that the galaxy didn't deserve her kindness, that he was honored to work beside her, but he knew she wouldn't want to hear any of that. So he simply nodded and went back to sorting supplies. Hana sat at her desk and began to hum. The soft melody drifted through the empty medical wing, gentle and sad and beautiful, like a lullaby for ghosts. Somewhere on the station, Pila was awake, reading casualty reports from a battle fought before she was born, and wondering how a woman with 20 years of war written on her skin could still have the softest hands in the galaxy. The Hall of Valor was the most impressive place in the entire academy. It was a long, wide corridor with high ceilings and walls made of dark polished stone. Along both sides, from floor to ceiling, were the names and holographic portraits of the greatest military heroes the Galactic Union had ever produced. Veskari generals with scarred scales and fierce eyes. Philly strategists whose brilliant minds had won wars without firing a shot. Murok warlords who had held entire planets against impossible odds. Each name was carved in golden light, and each portrait shimmered with lifelike detail. Students walked through this hall every day on their way to the training complex. Most barely looked at the walls anymore, but Doran always looked. He always slowed down when he passed his father's entry. Grand General Rokon, hero of Rethon, commander of the Third Fleet. The holographic portrait showed his father in full battle armor, his yellow eyes burning with the cold fire of a born warrior. Below the portrait, a list of campaigns and honors stretched nearly a meter long. Doran felt pride every time he saw it. But today, for the first time, he also felt something else, a question he couldn't shake. He was walking through the hall with a group of Veskari friends, when one of them, a loud boy named Dren, made a joke. "Has anyone ever seen a human on this wall?" Dren asked, laughing. "I've walked through here 1,000 times, not a single one." The group laughed. Doran laughed too, but his laugh came half a second late, and it felt wrong in his throat. He glanced at the walls as they walked, scanning the names. Veskari, Philly, Morok, Kellari. Dozens of species represented. There was not a single human name anywhere. It should have confirmed what Doran had always believed, that humans were not warriors. But after what he had seen in the corridor, after that arm and those scars and the impossible strength of a woman holding back a blast door with her bare hands, the empty wall didn't feel like proof anymore. It felt like a lie. Pila was already 3 steps ahead of him. She had spent the last 2 days in the Academy's deep archive, searching for anything related to human military involvement in Union conflicts. What she found was strange. The records existed, but they were thin. Brief entries buried in footnotes, names replaced with unit designations, achievements listed without context or celebration. It was as if someone had carefully, deliberately made humans invisible in the history of galactic warfare. But the deeper Pila dug, the more she found. Humans had been present at the Battle of Keller Station, where they had provided emergency medical support under fire. Humans had served as forward scouts during the Philly border conflict, moving through terrain that no other species could survive. Humans had been at Rethon. They had been everywhere, doing the hardest and most dangerous work, and receiving almost nothing in return. Then Pila found something that stopped her cold. The Hall of Valor had a restricted section. It was not a physical place. It was a sealed digital archive, accessible only to senior faculty and military officials. It contained entries for heroes who had requested that their names and records be kept private. Classified heroes, hidden legends. Pila went to Headmaster Ullis. Ullis was an elderly filly with faded silver chitin and slow, careful movements. He had run the academy for over 30 years. He was wise, patient, and very difficult to surprise. But when Pila asked about the restricted section of the Hall of Valor, his antenna went perfectly still. "Some individuals," Ullis said slowly, "have earned a place on that wall, but have chosen not to take it. They do not want recognition. They do not want to be remembered as warriors. We respect that choice." "Are any of them human?" Pila asked. Ullis was quiet for a long time. His old eyes studied her with an intensity that made Pila want to shrink back. Then he said, "I cannot answer that question, Pila. But I will tell you this. Respect is not always loud. Sometimes the ones who deserve the most honor are the ones who ask for the least." He said nothing more. Pila understood that the conversation was over. But his silence told her everything she needed to know. The following week, Tayrim came to the academy. Tayrim was a human military liaison, an officer assigned to the station to coordinate between human forces and the academy's administration. He was a tall man in his late 30s, with a clean uniform, short dark hair, and the kind of posture that came from years of military discipline. He had a combat service ribbon pinned to his chest, and he walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen real danger and survived it. He came to the medical wing on official business, routine health clearance paperwork. Doran happened to be there, sitting on a bed, while Hana applied a cooling patch to a training bruise on his shoulder. Taerim walked in, saw Hana, and stopped. Something changed in his face. It was subtle. A slight straightening of his spine, a shift in his expression that moved from casual to something much more serious. He crossed the room and stood before Hana. And then he spoke. "Ma'am," he said. The word hung in the air like a bell. Hana looked up at him. Something passed between them. A recognition, a shared history, a conversation that happened entirely in silence. Then Taerim seemed to catch himself. He cleared his throat, glanced at Doran, and corrected himself. "Nurse Hana," he said. "I have some paperwork for you." But the damage was done. Doran had heard it. A human military officer with rank and combat experience had walked into the room and called the school nurse, "Ma'am," not as a polite greeting, as a reflex. The kind of reflex that came from addressing a superior officer, someone who outranked you, someone you respected so deeply that your body responded before your brain could stop it. Doran watched Taerim hand over the paperwork. He watched the way the officer stood in Hana's presence. Not casual, not relaxed, but at a subtle form of attention. The way a soldier stood before a commander. When Taerim left, Doran followed him. He caught the officer in the corridor outside the training hall. Taerim turned and looked at Doran with calm, steady eyes. "Who is she?" Doran asked. His voice was harder than he intended. "The nurse. Who is she really?" Taerim studied him. There was no hostility in the man's face, but there was a weight behind his eyes, as if he was deciding how much truth a young Veskari could handle. "She's your school nurse," Taerim said. "Don't lie to me," Doran said. "I saw her hold a blast door open with her hands. I saw her arm. I've seen my father's war scars. Hers are worse. And you just called her ma'am, like she was your commanding officer." Then he took a slow breath and looked Doran directly in the eyes. "She's the reason your father is alive, son," he said. Then he turned and walked away. Doran stood in the corridor for a long time after that. The words echoed in his skull. "The reason your father is alive." His father, Grand General Rokan, the hero of Rethan, the greatest warrior in the Veskari Empire. Alive because of a human woman who handed out candy and hummed while she worked. That night, Doran did something he had never done before. He broke into his father's private military correspondence. The files were encrypted with family security codes that Doran had memorized as a child. He felt guilty, but the question was burning inside him like fire, and he could not let it go. He searched for anything related to humans. Most of the files were routine, supply reports, fleet movements, diplomatic messages. But deep in the archive, buried in a folder that had not been opened in years, he found a single personal message. It was from his father, addressed to no name, just a code designation. The message was short. "I owe you a debt that my species has no word for. You came into the fire when no one else would. You carried my soldiers out on your back while your own blood was on the ground. I have stood before enemy fleets without fear, but I do not have the courage you showed that day. If there is anything you ever need, for the rest of your life, you have only to ask." Below it was a reply, even shorter. "I need a quiet life. That's all." Doran stared at the screen. His eyes burned. He read the messages again and again, until he had memorized every word. Then he closed the file, sat in the dark, and thought about a woman with soft hands and terrible scars, who had asked for nothing but silence. And for the first time in his young life, Doran understood that he knew absolutely nothing about strength. The attack came at breakfast. There was no warning. One moment, The dining hall was filled with the ordinary noise of hundreds of students eating and talking and arguing about test scores. The next moment, the entire station shook like a toy in a giant's fist. The lights flickered. Trays slid off tables. A deep, terrible sound rolled through the corridors, the sound of an explosion against the outer hull. Then, the alarms began. They were not drill alarms. Every student in the academy knew the difference. Drill alarms were steady and calm, designed to guide people to safety without causing panic. These alarms were sharp, rapid, and loud. They screamed danger. They screamed, "This is real." The station's communication system crackled to life. A voice, tight with fear, announced that hostile forces had breached the docking ring. Armed intruders were aboard. All students were to proceed immediately to lockdown zones. Security teams were responding. Chaos followed. Students ran. Some screamed. The larger Veskari pushed through crowds, their instincts telling them to fight, but they had no weapons and no training for a real attack. Philly students froze, their sensitive antennae overwhelmed by the flood of fear pheromones filling the air. Morok children huddled against walls, making themselves as small as possible. The attackers were Veskari separatists, rogue soldiers and mercenaries who rejected the Galactic Union and wanted to tear it apart. They had come for hostages. The children of generals, politicians, and diplomats were worth more than gold on the black market. And this station was full of them. They moved fast. Within 10 minutes, they had disabled the main security office, locked down the docking ring, and begun sweeping the corridors. They were armed with military-grade plasma rifles, and utterly ruthless. The Academy's small security team fought bravely, but was outmatched. Bodies fell in the corridors. In the medical wing, Ha-Na heard the alarms and stopped humming. She stood very still for exactly 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, something changed. It was not visible on the outside. She didn't grow taller, or wider, or fiercer. But something behind her eyes shifted, like a door opening into a dark room that had been locked for years. The gentleness didn't disappear. It simply moved aside to make room for something else. Then she moved. She sealed the medical wing's main entrance with the emergency lockdown protocol. She activated the secondary barriers, heavy panels that slid into place over the windows and vents. She turned to Yunho, who was already on his feet, his face pale, but his hands steady. "Code Black," she said. 2 words, that was all. Yunho nodded and went to a supply cabinet that no one else had ever opened. He pulled out a case from the back, hidden behind boxes of bandages and bottles of antiseptic. Inside the case were things that did not belong in a school medical wing. Field tourniquets, combat stimulant injectors, a compact surgical kit with tools that were designed not for clean hospital operating rooms, but for muddy battlefields and burning corridors. And at the bottom of the case, wrapped in sterile cloth, 2 short combat blades with blackened edges. Ha-Na took one blade. Yunho took the other. Then the students arrived. They came running down the corridor in a terrified group, 15 of them, a mix of Veskari, Philly, Morok, and others. Doran was among them, his scales dark with stress. Pila was there too, her forearms wrapped around herself, her antennae flat against her head. They had been cut off from the main lockdown zones by the attackers, and had nowhere else to go. Ha-Na opened the medical wing door just long enough to pull them inside, then sealed it again. The students collapsed against walls and beds, gasping, shaking, some of them crying. Ha-Na stood before them. She looked at each of their faces, and then she spoke in a voice that none of them had ever heard from her before. "Listen to me," she said. "Listen carefully. You are going to stay behind me. You are going to do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. You are not going to make a sound unless I say so. And no one is going to die today." It was not a comfort. It was not a gentle reassurance. It was a command. It came from somewhere deep inside her, from a place where softness did not exist, where there was only iron and fire, and the absolute refusal to let anyone under her protection be harmed. Every student obeyed, not because they understood, but because something in her voice made disobedience impossible. They waited. Hana positioned herself near the sealed door, blade in hand, body relaxed but coiled. Yunho moved to a secondary position near the back exit. The students were arranged in the center of the room, low to the ground, behind the heaviest furniture Hana and Yunho could push into place. The mercenaries came 8 minutes later. There were 8 of them, large Veskari separatists in black combat armor, carrying plasma rifles and stun batons. They had tracked the fleeing students to the medical wing. They wanted the children inside, especially Doran, the son of Grand General Rokan. They breached the outer barrier with an explosive charge. The door blew inward with a roar of fire and metal. Smoke filled the corridor. The first mercenary stepped through the gap, rifle raised, scanning for targets. He never found one. Hana came out of the smoke like she was made of it. She moved so fast that Doran, watching from behind an overturned bed, could barely track her with his eyes. She closed the distance to the first mercenary in less than a second. Her blade flashed once, a short, precise strike to the gap in his armor, between the chest plate and the shoulder guard. The mercenary went down without a sound. The second and third came through together. Hana dropped low, swept the legs of one, and drove her elbow into the throat of the other. She took the fallen one's plasma rifle, reversed it, and used the stock as a blunt weapon against the fourth mercenary who came charging through the smoke. It was not a fight. Doran had seen fights. He had trained in combat since he was old enough to stand. His father had shown him recordings of real battles, and Doran had studied them with the careful eye of a young warrior who dreamed of glory. This was different. This was something beyond fighting. Hana moved through the mercenaries the way water moves through cracks in stone, finding every gap, every weakness, every opening. She didn't waste a single movement. Every step, every strike, every shift of her weight had a purpose. She used the narrow corridor to her advantage, forcing the mercenaries to come at her one or two at a time instead of all at once. Yunho covered her from behind, engaging a mercenary who tried to circle around through a maintenance hatch. He was good, calm, efficient, trained. But Hana was something else entirely. She took a hit. A stun baton caught her across the ribs. She absorbed the impact, twisted, and used the momentum to drive her blade into the attacker's weapon hand. Another mercenary fired a plasma burst that grazed her shoulder, leaving a smoking burn across her uniform. She didn't flinch. She didn't even slow down. 8 mercenaries, armed, armored, trained killers. Hana put them all down in under 2 minutes. When the smoke cleared, she was standing in the corridor, surrounded by unconscious bodies. Her white uniform was torn and stained. Blood, both green and red, was on her hands. The burn on her shoulder was still smoking slightly. She was breathing hard, but her hands were steady. She turned and walked back into the medical wing. The students stared at her in absolute silence. Doran's mouth was open. Pila's antennae were standing straight up, trembling. Hana looked at them, and slowly, carefully, the iron behind her eyes began to soften. The door to that dark room closed again, gently, and the woman they knew, the school nurse with the candy and the humming, returned. "Is anyone hurt?" she asked. Her voice was gentle again. No one spoke. 20 minutes later, Tayrim arrived with a full squad of human marines. They secured the station, swept the corridors, and took the surviving mercenaries into custody. When Tayrim walked into the medical wing and saw Hana standing there, bloodied, bruised, and surrounded by 15 unharmed students, He didn't look surprised. He didn't look impressed. He simply nodded, the way one soldier nods to another after a mission. Hana nodded back. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out a piece of candy, and offered it to Pila, who was sitting on the floor with her arms wrapped around her knees. "You did well," Hana said softly. "It's over now." Pila took the candy with trembling hands. Behind them, one of the mercenaries was being dragged to his feet by Marines. He was half-conscious, his armor cracked, his face swollen. As he was pulled past the medical wing, he looked through the open door and saw Hana. His eyes went wide. His body stiffened. He whispered something in Veskari, a battlefield name, the kind that soldiers gave to things they feared. "The ghost of Rithan," he breathed. Hana looked at him. Her face showed nothing. No pride, no anger, no satisfaction. She simply looked at him the way she looked at everything, with calm, steady, impossibly gentle eyes. "I'm just the school nurse," she said. The mercenary was dragged away, and in the medical wing, Hana sat down at her desk, pulled out a roll of fresh bandages, and began treating the burn on her own shoulder with the same careful patience she used for every student who walked through her door. After a while, she started humming again, and for the first time, the students understood what that humming meant. It meant safety. It meant the danger was over. It meant that somewhere in this terrifying, violent galaxy, there was a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side, still choosing to be kind. Doran sat on the floor with his back against the wall. His hands were still shaking, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was awe. The academy was quiet in the days after the attack. Repair crews worked on the damaged corridors. Counselors were brought in from 3 different planets to speak with students who were still having nightmares. The Galactic Union sent investigators and security teams. New defense systems were installed around the docking ring. Slowly, carefully, life began to return to normal. But normal was different now. Everything looked the same. The corridors, the classrooms, the dining hall. The schedule had not changed. The teachers still taught. The students still studied. But something had shifted beneath the surface, like a crack in the foundation of a building that everyone could feel, even though no one could see it. The change was most visible near the medical wing. Before the attack, students walked past it without thinking. It was just a room with bandages and a quiet human woman. Now, students slowed down when they passed. Some of them stopped and just stood there for a moment, watching Hana work. She was doing exactly what she always did, arranging supplies, checking inventory, humming softly. She had a new uniform to replace the one that had been torn and burned. Her sleeves were long again, pulled all the way to her wrists. The burn on her shoulder was bandaged beneath the fabric, invisible. She was the same. She had always been the same. The students were the ones who had changed. Pila came to the medical wing every day now. She didn't always have a reason. Sometimes she just sat in the corner and did her homework while Hana worked. Hana never asked why. She just gave Pila a piece of candy and let her stay. There was a comfort in being near her that Pila couldn't explain. It was like sitting next to a fire on a cold night. You just needed to feel its warmth. 1 week after the attack, Grand General Rokan came to the academy. His arrival was an event. A Veskari battlecruiser appeared in orbit, and a shuttle descended to the academy's docking ring with a full honor guard. Rokan was the most famous living Veskari, a towering figure with battle-scarred scales the color of dark iron, and eyes that burned like twin suns. He wore no ceremonial armor, just a simple military uniform with campaign ribbons that stretched across his entire chest. His presence filled every room he entered, the way thunder fills a sky. He came officially to inspect the Academy's new security measures and to check on his son. Doran met him in the docking bay, standing straight, trying to look like the warrior his father wanted him to be. Rokon gripped his son's shoulder, looked him over with sharp eyes, and grunted in approval. That was enough. But Rokon did not leave after the inspection. He asked to be taken to the medical wing. Doran led him there. They walked through the corridors together, the great general and his young son, and every alien they passed stopped and stared. Rokon ignored them all. His eyes were fixed ahead, and there was something in his face that Doran had never seen before. Not the fierce focus of battle, not the cold calculation of strategy. It was something softer, something that looked almost like nervousness. They reached the medical wing. The door was open. Hana was inside, sitting at her desk, writing notes in a patient file. She looked up when the shadow of the great general fell across her doorway. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The most powerful Veskari warrior in the galaxy, and a small human woman in a white uniform. Then Rokon stepped forward, placed his right fist over his heart, the Veskari gesture of deepest respect, used only between warriors of equal or greater standing, and bowed. It was not a small bow. It was not a polite nod between acquaintances. Grand General Rokon, hero of Rethon, commander of the Third Fleet, bowed deep, and held it for 3 full seconds. In Veskari culture, the depth and duration of a bow measured the level of respect. 3 seconds was what you gave to a living legend. Doran felt the floor shift beneath his feet. He had never seen his father bow to anyone. Not to politicians, not to other generals, not to the Union Council itself. And here he was, bowing to the school nurse. Hana stood up. She bowed back. A simple, human bow. Shorter, but just as sincere. Then she smiled. "It's been a long time," she said. "Not long enough," Rokon replied. His deep voice was rough, but his eyes were warm. "You look well." "I am well," Hana said. "Would you like some tea?" Rokon sat in a chair that was much too small for him, holding a cup that looked like a thimble in his massive clawed hands. And they talked. They spoke quietly, in low voices, leaning toward each other like old friends sharing memories that no one else could understand. Doran watched from the doorway, and he saw something remarkable. His father laughed. Not the harsh, barking laugh of a military man telling war stories. A real laugh. Quiet, and full of something that might have been joy, and might have been grief, and was probably both. They talked for over an hour. When Rokon finally stood to leave, he placed his hand on Hana's shoulder, gently, so gently, as if she were made of glass, and said something in a voice so low that Doran couldn't hear it. Hana nodded. Her eyes were bright. Then the general left, and the school nurse went back to her desk and her work and her humming. In the days that followed, the truth about Hana spread through the academy. Not because anyone announced it, not because files were leaked or secrets were revealed. It spread the way all truths eventually spread, through whispers and questions and the slow, unstoppable force of curiosity. Pila was the one who pieced it together. She shared what she had found, carefully, respectfully, with only a small group of trusted students. Doran was among them. Hana had served in a human special operations medical unit for 20 years. She had been deployed to 14 major combat engagements across 3 separate wars, including the Siege of Rethon. She had been a field medic, a combat surgeon, and eventually a unit commander. Her team specialized in the most dangerous mission in warfare, extracting wounded soldiers from active battlefields. They went in where no one else would go. They carried the broken and the dying out of fire and ruin, while the world exploded around them. Over her career, Hana was credited with directly saving over 600 lives, human, Veskari, Philly, and others. She had been wounded 31 times. She had been declared clinically dead twice, and been brought back both times. Her body carried the scars of every single mission, burns, blades, claws, bullets, plasma, shrapnel. She had more confirmed combat engagements than most Vescari generals. She had seen more death and pain than anyone at the Academy could imagine. And when it was over, she had asked for no medals. She had requested that her name be removed from every public record. She had turned down promotions, honors, and a retirement pension that would have let her live in comfort for the rest of her life. Instead, she had become a school nurse. Doran went to see her alone, 2 days after learning the truth. He found her in the medical wing, folding blankets. She looked up and smiled at him the way she always did. He tried to speak. The words caught in his throat. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say, but standing in front of her, knowing what he now knew, the words felt small and useless. "I called your people weak," he finally said. His voice was rough. "I called humans soft. I said you were prey creatures. I was wrong. I'm sorry." She looked at him with those calm brown eyes, eyes that had seen battlefields and burning cities and friends dying in her arms. And her expression was not anger or judgment or superiority. It was kindness. "You weren't entirely wrong, Doran," she said. "We are soft. We break easily. We scar." She rolled up her sleeve, all the way, past the elbow, up to the shoulder. The full map of 20 years of war was there. The burns, the cuts, the claw marks, the plasma scars, the places where her skin had been torn apart and stitched back together so many times that it barely looked like skin anymore. Doran stared. He had seen his father's scars and thought they were the marks of the greatest warrior he would ever know. Hana's arm held more damage than his father's entire body. "But we keep going," Hana said. She rolled her sleeve back down, gently, the way she did everything. "That's the thing about humans, Doran. We're not strong because we don't break. We're strong because we always put ourselves back together." Pila came to see her the next day. She had one question, the question that everyone wanted to ask, but no one had the courage to voice. "Why?" Pila asked. "Why this? You could be anything, a commander, an advisor, a hero on any world in the Union. Why are you here, in a school medical wing, giving candy to children?" Hana was quiet for a long time. She looked around the room, at the clean white beds, the neatly arranged supplies, the small window that showed the stars outside. Then she looked back at Pila. "Because I spent 20 years learning how to end lives," she said. "I wanted to spend the rest of mine learning how to save them." She paused. "And because someone has to make sure you all grow up safe. Someone has to be here when you fall down and scrape your knees, or when you get scared in the middle of the night, or when the universe feels too big and too frightening. That job, that simple, quiet, ordinary job, is worth more than any war I ever fought." Pila didn't know what to say. She took the candy Hana offered her and held it tightly, as if it were something precious. Weeks passed. The academy healed. The corridors were repaired. The students returned to their routines. New first-year students arrived, small and wide-eyed and nervous, knowing nothing of the attack or the woman who had stopped it. On their first day, a young Vescari boy, tiny for his species, barely reaching Hana's shoulder, tripped in the corridor outside the medical wing and scraped his knee. He sat on the floor and cried, the way children do everywhere in the galaxy, regardless of species or planet, or the sharpness of their claws. Hana knelt beside him. She cleaned the scrape with a soft cloth, applied a small bandage with steady, gentle hands, and pulled a piece of candy from her pocket. "There you go," she said. "All better." The boy sniffled and smiled back. He took the candy and ran off to join his friends, his injury already forgotten. Hana watched him go. Then she stood up and walked back into the medical wing, where someone had hung a small plaque on the wall beside the door. It was simple, just a few words etched into a metal plate. placed there by hands that had never told her they were doing it. It read, "To heal is the highest form of courage. Human proverb." Hana looked at it for a moment. She didn't take it down. She didn't comment on it. She simply sat at her desk, picked up her pen, and went back to work. And she hummed. The melody drifted through the medical wing and out into the corridor, soft and warm and steady. Students passing by heard it and felt, without knowing why, a little bit safer, a little bit braver, a little bit more certain that the galaxy, for all its vastness and violence and darkness, had room for gentleness. Across the galaxy, species measured strength in warships and conquest, in the sharpness of claws and the thickness of armor. But in a small medical wing on a quiet space station, the most dangerous human alive was offering candy to children. And she had never been more at peace.